Evening, everyone. This is the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Board of Directors meeting for Wednesday, October 12th, 2022. In accordance with the California Governor's Code, Section 54953E, in a consideration of the coronavirus, members of the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Board of Directors and staff have the option to participate in this meeting by teleconference. The public may also attend via Zoom. Members of the public participating remotely and using Zoom may comment during the public meeting or the applicable agenda item by using the raised hand feature, and you will be recognized by the chair. Those using the telephone with audio only feature should press star 9 on your phone to initiate the raised hand function. You will then be announced unmuted and your time to speak will begin. The public may provide comments on any matter listed on the agenda. Speakers are customarily limited to 3 minutes each. However, the board chair may increase or decrease the time allotted to each speaker based on the number of speakers, the length of the agenda, and the complexity of the subject matter. Speaking time will not decrease to less than 1 minute. And with that, may we have a roll call, please?
Yes, thank you. I will begin with those who are joining us in person this evening. Chair Gibbons.
Here.
Vice Chair Tyson.
Here.
Director Willie.
Here.
Director Makachuk.
Present.
Participating remotely, we have Director Hilton.
Here.
Fliger.
Here.
Lenny.
Here.
Shua.
Here.
Abekoga.
Here.
Walia.
Here.
Line.
Here.
Lee.
Present.
Thank you. And I will note that currently we have Director Martinez Beltran absent, but we do have a quorum.
Thank you very much. At this time, we will go to the public comment on matters not listed on the agenda. The public may provide comments on any matter not listed on the agenda, provided that it is within the subject matter of the jurisdiction of Silicon Valley Clean Energy. Speakers are customarily limited to 3 minutes each. However, the board chair may increase or decrease the time allotted to each speaker based on the number of speakers, the length of the agenda, and the complexity of the subject matter. Speaking time will not be decreased to less than 1 minute. Madam Secretary, do we have any hands raised?
I see none.
Okay, we have 2 members of the public, but no hands raised. Thank you. With that, we will close the public comment on matters not on the agenda and move to the consent calendar. This is a board action item, and it is items 1A through 1MN. And are there any members of the board that wish to take anything off the consent calendar? Seeing no raised hands on that, are there any members of the public wishing to take an item off the consent calendar? I see no raised hands for that. We will bring it back to the board for discussion and/or motion on the consent calendar.
Tyson moves to approve.
Thank you. Director Tyson moves.
And alternate Makachuk will second.
Thank you. A motion made by Director, your name doesn't want to come to me tonight, Tyson, and alternate Director Makachuk. And may we have a roll call, please?
Yes, thank you. Chair Gibbons.
Aye.
Vice Chair Tyson.
Yes.
Director Willie.
Yes.
Director Makachuk.
Aye.
Hilton.
Aye.
Liger.
Yes.
Rennie.
Aye.
Shua.
Aye.
Abekoga.
Aye.
Walia.
Aye.
Line.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries with Director Martinez Beltran absent.
Thank you all. We will now begin the regular calendar. We have items 2 through 6, and please all note you would also have received instructions that we have a closed door session at the end of the meeting, and then we'll reconvene to close out this meeting and report any action. So we'll begin with item number 2, the CEO report. It is discussion, and Director Balachandran.
Thank you, Chair Gibbons, members of the board. I would like to introduce our new Director of Energy Services and Community Relations. As you know, Don Bray is evolving to a...
Girish, excuse the interruption, but you're fading in and out. You need to speak directly into your speakers or whatever.
Okay. Sorry about that.
You're on mute now.
Can you hear me now? Okay. If someone could say something, I'll know if I can.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I don't think I can hear anyone.
Yes.
No, I can hear you. Okay. All right. If you can hear me, that's good. So I wanted to introduce Adam Selvin, who's our new Director of Energy Services. He joins us from previous career in PG&E and Clear Result. I'm going to hand it over to him to introduce himself to you, and he is live and in person.
Either way.
Okay. Good evening. Adam Sullivan. I am the new Director of Energy Services and Community Relations for SVCE. Just a quick introduction. Professionally, I'm a mechanical engineer licensed in California as a PE. I earned my MBA at Haas when the enthalpy conversation was no longer applicable to my job role. That was a progression. I started as an engineer for the Department of Energy, KW Engineering, and then PG&E doing highly technical kind of energy audits for large customers when PG&E decided I was good at other stuff. So I had a whirlwind tour around PG&E from customer care in all sorts of capacities, gas operations, in process improvement, IT, and then back to customer care. I was privileged to help customers through the explosion in San Bruno, through many wildfires, through rate changes, through you name it. Each one seeming like a more monumental task than the previous one. I left PG&E to go back outside, a private company, Clear Result, doing consulting, primarily focused on program design for large commercial industrial customers. I also did some residential work, some small business work, and really got to experience kind of the national all of North America, kind of from a programmatic lens. You know, I got to know a lot of the utilities and really kind of expand my view from California, which is probably why the job description at SVCE was so attractive to me. It turns out that the rest of the country and potentially the world is watching what we do here. And within California, the Silicon Valley itself, is another focal point. I think it's a perfect customer base to be kind of working with our communities to further clean energy, and I'm super excited to be taking on that role. Personally, I grew up in the East Bay. I live in the East Bay. I'm raising two daughters, 13 and 15. So I accept all sorts of advice, sympathy, and Venmo. It's been a lot of fun to kind of bring them up in this world. They have no idea what their dad does, but finally I can say, clean energy, and they're catching on to what that means. So it's my privilege to work with all of you, and I look forward to continued success. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. It's a pleasure to welcome you with such what I value tremendously, and I know other board members do, is your multidisciplinary background. It has such a richness that allows our organizational culture and our cross-pollination between people, which is so important. So we're delighted to have you here. Welcome. And I was very pleased to meet you and your wife at the Cal CCA gala the other weekend. So I'm glad to have that chance to meet you both personally as well. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And next, I'd like to reintroduce, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Okay, I'd like to reintroduce someone you know very well. Internally, we kid that this is Don Bray 3.0 because Don Bray worked for SVCE before SVCE was created. He and a few others were staff to a number of elected officials to really bring this together. And then, of course, he was with us from, the first, I think he's employee number 3, Andrea, and he are like 2 and 3. So that's fantastic. And now he is evolving to his next role. But before I give it to him, I just did want to also say, please look at PDF page number 78, where you will see that we were awarded from CRS the Customer Resource Center eHub Award on September 16th. And this was a brainchild of Don's from a few years ago, and that's being recognized nationally. And with that, I'm going to hand it to Don for his third introduction to the board.
Well, I'll begin by saying that eHub was the result of, maybe originated by the CPAG. And some of you may remember this, but this was the Customer Program Advisory Group that we put together probably 2018, 2019 timeframe. And they're like, hey, why don't you guys go all in on education? And so that led to some design work and ultimately the build out with contributions from a whole bunch of different people inside of SVCE and outside of SVCE to the eHub. But it was just terrific to see SVCE recognized for that. I think it really is, it is a leading offer. I'm really excited about having Adam here. You know, when you put together the usual laundry list of wish list, you might call it, of things you want in a new employee. We had business and technical skills, utility experience with customers and marketing. C&I experience was super important, especially providing services to C&I customers. And then maybe most importantly, just someone who really gets it around the potential we have for impact here. And Adam just nailed it in the interview process, especially on that last point, which I think really is the most important. So I think we're in week 4 now of the transition. I think that transition is largely complete, and I'm excited about moving into a new role where I'm going to focus on development of new organizational capabilities and service offerings to our customers. Something I've really been working on a lot all along, but working across the different departments within SVCE on that, you know, very much in association with the focus areas that we have for next year and beyond. So really excited about, I don't call it 3.0, but I guess Girish is, and now it's stuck, and so here we are, but looking forward to it.
Chair, back to you. This end of my report.
Oh.
Unless you have
I
comments.
think we have
for-
some comments.
Yes,
I think
please.
we have some comments. Director Mekachuk?
Yes, Dawn, it's great to see you in a new role, and I'm surprised that you remember the Customer Program Advisory Group, because I think that's where I met you on the first day of that of that group, and also I think Girish, that's where I met you as well. So a new challenge, and I know you're going to succeed. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian.
And I'm not sure I'd know what to do if you weren't here, so thank you for hanging in there and moving into even more significant roles. Okay, thank you. And back to Girish, any other CEO report items?
No, Chair. This is it. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move on to item number 3, which is approve the Silicon Valley Clean Energy 2022 Integrated Resource Plan. This is an action item for the board. The staff speaking will be Maren Wenzel, our Senior Manager of Energy Policy and Regulatory Analysis, and she will utilize a presentation, I think. Yes, Maren?
That's correct. And I'll go ahead and share my screen if we're ready. Hopefully everyone's able to see that. Seeing some head noddings. Okay, great. All right, well.
So Maren, we
no.
cannot see anything yet.
Oh, no, okay. Is that working?
Yes, that did it.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, with that, yes, thank you, Chair. I'm going to be speaking this evening once again about our integrated resource plan. And we have a lot to cover, so I'll jump right into it. So as a bit of background, this is going to be SVC's 3rd filed IRP with the California Public Utilities Commission. And in both of the previous IRPs, we've brought them to the board for approval. And so that's why we're here again tonight. As a little bit of background for this cycle, we really kicked this off back in June 2022 when we had a workshop with the board talking about the future of California's grid. So at that time, we talked about renewable integration and storage, grid reliability issues, and electrification. We've then spent most of this summer really working on developing our IRP models and narrative and the portfolios that we're planning to put forward. And we brought those initial results to the board during the last meeting in September. And we reviewed the draft results. We talked about enforcement risk, which we'll talk about again this evening, and ultimately decided to develop another case where we look at a 65% RPS scenario. So for the last month, we've been iterating again a bit. And tonight we are seeking board approval so that we can file in a timely manner on November 1st. Some broader background on the IRP and why we do it. The IRP is really the planning process that the state utilizes in order to ensure we're on track for the electricity sector to meet the electricity sector's share of the state climate goals. So if we look back to 2019, the electricity sector was emitting almost 60 million metric tons of emissions. And where we need to be by 2045 is to get that number down closer to 10 million metric tons. So in this IRP cycle, our planning horizon goes out to 2035, and we're showing plans about how SVCE can meet our share of a 25 million metric ton target. And just for a little bit of context here, SVCE is about 1.5% of California's total load. So back in 2019, we would have been on a load share basis emitting about 0.85 million metric tons. And so the plans that we're going to be talking about today put us on a track to emit roughly 1/3 that amount by 2035. So before I jump into our results, I did want to just highlight again what we are trying to bake into all of our portfolios. So I think any portfolio we put forward needs to focus on what I think of as the three big planning goals for the electricity system. So that's being clean, reliable, and affordable. The IRP is also fundamentally a compliance filing. So we need to make sure that the portfolios we put forward meet the requirements of the proceeding itself. And then finally, as we'll talk about a bit at the end, we also want to be thinking about all the risks, both financial and regulatory, that go and come along with any given portfolio. So with that, we can jump into our portfolio results. So we are required to file at least one conforming portfolio as part of this IRP process. And that portfolio will be our preferred portfolio. But we're also allowed to file additional portfolios if we would like to. And so what we're recommending tonight is that we file our 100% carbon-free annually and 65% RPS by 2030 as our preferred conforming portfolio. And then in addition to that, we're hoping to file two other conforming portfolios, one where we achieve 100% carbon-free on an annual basis and a 75% RPS by 2030, and one where we achieve 100% carbon-free annually, and 100% of that is met by RPS resources by 2035. Before I show the results, just as a reminder, all of these portfolios include our existing portfolios, both stuff that's under contract and already online. It includes all of our PG&E allocations, and it also includes some additional short-term RA, which I'll talk about a bit more in a moment. Each of these portfolios also assumes that roughly 10% of our annual energy needs will be met with short-term index plus deals. And in the 65% case, that ends up being about 25% being met by those types of contracts due to some additional hydro that we add in the later years. Part of the compliance obligation is that we do have an assigned load forecast for the IRP. So all of these plans assume that our load increases by about 11% by 2035. And once again, in all of these plans, we remain carbon-free annually. So with that, I'll jump right to the results. So these two graphics show the amount of new build we would have in each of the three portfolios for both the year 2030 and 2035. Importantly, none of our portfolios require any additional new build before 2028. The real big thing to point out here is just that in our most aggressive scenario, the 100% RPS scenario, we would need to build roughly 2.5 times as much capacity as we require in the 65% case. And that's for 2035. If you look at the 2030 numbers, the delta between those two scenarios is much more dramatic. So jumping into each scenario in a little bit more detail. So in the 65% case, we really just add a relatively small amount of new geothermal in 2030. And that's really to hit a target that we've decided we want to achieve of meeting 15% of our energy on an annual basis using geothermal. And then by 2035, we add some additional projects to hit RPS, GHG, and RA goals. And that's a mix of in and out of state wind and hybrid solar and storage projects. The 75% case, we have a bit more of an aggressive build because we need to hit that 75% target in 2030, and then quite a bit of build in 2035 to maintain that. And then when you get out to the 100% case, it's a pretty aggressive target in 2030, and really quite a lot of capacity by 2035. And in fact, in this scenario, we actually added some additional geothermal because we wanted to make sure that the wind build wasn't too extreme. But even here, it sort of felt to us like maybe we're on the edge of building more than we can be certain that we're able to bring online in that time horizon. So as I talked about at the outset, we wanted to make sure that all of our portfolios achieve clean, reliable, and affordable. So I want to talk through how all of the portfolios are compared on those metrics. So first of all, on the clean front, all of these portfolios achieve 100% carbon-free on an annual basis. They all at least meet their RPS targets, and in many cases exceed their RPS targets in a given year. And once again, on a compliance basis, we have to show that we're able to meet a GHG target. So, and that's calculated using what we call the Clean System Power Tool, which is provided by the CPUC. And so what we show here is our results for the CSP, which are showing basically that we are emitting less than our target of 0.334 million metric tons in 2035. In addition to the compliance obligation, we also wanted to do an additional check to see if these portfolios are putting us on a path to achieve a 24/7 clean resource portfolio. And so that's what the results on this slide show. This slide I recognize is a little noisy, so don't worry too much about the numbers. The key takeaway here is just that green is good. And so the graphic at the top shows the results for our 65% RPS case. And here we have an average CFE score of approximately 95%. And the reason why it has a higher score than the other two scenarios is that additional hydro provides a lot of clean energy in the overnight hours in the spring. And if we were to look at where SVCE's current carbon-free energy score is well, not quite current, but back in 2024, we'd see that we have roughly a 95% score today. But if you remove the Diablo Canyon energy, which is around the clock GHG-free energy, we would be at about 91% in 2024. So getting to 95 is showing a pretty solid trajectory over the next 8 years. On the reliability front, this is the first IRP where we were obligated to actually show that we're hitting specific reliability targets. And what we did was essentially right-size our portfolio by backfilling our remaining RA obligation after our portfolios were built with some short-term capacity. But in each instance, what we did was check to make sure that we're using less than our load share allocation of the fossil fleet to meet that need. And while we may use resources other than fossil to actually hit our RA targets, that's essentially being used to help show the commission that we're not over-relying on existing resources in order to meet our needs. And interestingly, even though those three portfolios have very different build-outs, because RPS resources don't contribute very much to reliability relative to resources like fossil, the amount we lean on the system is actually relatively small, the difference between the portfolios is actually relatively small. Finally, on the affordability front, granted these are very big numbers, what we find is that the costs are actually relatively consistent across all of these portfolios, given how many assumptions and how much uncertainty there is in market prices going forward. I think we can say that these are all sort of relatively consistent, but we do find that the 65% RPS case is moderately less expensive than the other two. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about risk. So when we met last month, we talked a little bit about the fact that there's this new risk that the IRP might be enforced. So this has always been a planning document, but the CPUC staff recently issued a white paper indicating that they might make the IRPs enforceable, which essentially means that we might be required to actually procure what we put into our plans. And so I think this uncertainty is something we need to think about when we select a preferred portfolio. Another issue we need to be thinking about is RA compliance. The RA reform work is still very much ongoing. And so we don't know exactly what accounting rules are going to look like. And we don't necessarily know exactly how different types of resources are going to be valued in the new RA methodology. So that creates another sort of regulatory risk. In any portfolio, I think we need to be thinking about stranded asset risk. So if we were to have a loss, some loss of load, either due to direct access or customer bypass, we don't want to have a lot of long-term contracts in our portfolio, right? We need a bit of flexibility to help manage our variation from our load forecast. And then finally, we know that recently there's been a lot of development risk in the market, which sort of speaks to the fact that there's a lot of value in having a portfolio which balances both existing and new resources to make sure that we're not reliant on developers bringing projects online in order to hit our targets. So when we take this all together, we think it creates a compelling case for the 100% carbon-free annual and 65% RPS by 2030 case to be our preferred conforming plan. So that's what we're suggesting to the board this evening. We think it provides the most valuable mix of being clean, reliable, and affordable, while also being a very reasonable amount of build and having the lowest amount of regulatory risk. So very quickly, I just wanted to give a little bit more context for what this portfolio looks like in the context of what we've already done. So the graphic on the left shows in solid colors what we already have under contract and expect to have online by 2030. And you'll see hopefully you'll be able to see there's a tiny little sliver of patterned green at the top. So that's that additional little bit of geothermal we're adding. When we get out to 2035, you'll see, roughly 775 megawatts of solid capacity. And then that stack of pattern fill at the top would be the new capacity we're adding. So it is a lot of capacity, but relative to what we've already done, it's very achievable. And then the other graphic is really just showing our annual energy load balance. So you see that in this portfolio, effectively what we're doing is as we lose our Diablo Canyon allocation, we're making up for that with a bit of extra hydro and then those RPS resources. So with that, I want to jump ahead and talk a little bit about key themes in the narrative before I open it up for discussion. So as we mentioned a moment ago, staff has indicated that they would like to make these IRP plans enforceable. And we don't quite know what that means yet, so that creates a lot of risk for us. So in the narrative, we're really trying to highlight the fact that we know the electricity sector is evolving very rapidly and that we need flexibility in how we deal with our planning over time. So one thing we want to talk about is the fact that ultimately these portfolios are the results of modeling efforts and our best guess today of what we think we're going to need. But that, when it comes time to do procurement, it's going to depend upon the results of the solicitations and, where the market is at that time. Additionally, we want to highlight the fact that when the CPUC or the legislature makes changes to policies or issues new procurement orders, it has a very big impact on our ability to do our planning. So we do an offshore wind sensitivity in this IRP, where we talk about the fact that if they were to do a procurement order for offshore wind that gave us our load share allocation of what the CPUC has said they think the system needs by 2035, it would actually displace the need for virtually all of the resources that we put into our 65% portfolio. Just to speak to the fact that these procurement orders have a very meaningful impact on our planning, and that we can't necessarily have a world where we have both procurement orders and we have to enforce our IRPs. So with that, I will just about to open it up for discussion, but first I want to talk about next steps. So we're hoping that this evening the board will delegate authority to the CEO to provide final approval. Staff will then finalize the narrative and the required filing templates. Garish will hopefully then approve the filing and we will get it filed by November 1st. As far as exactly what we're seeking approval for tonight, we're hoping for approval to file that 100% carbon-free annual 65% RPS by 2030 plan as our preferred conforming plan. Additionally, to file the other two portfolios that I've been discussing this evening as alternate conforming plans. As I discussed in the narrative, we'll highlight the fact that all of these portfolios are illustrative and that we need the CPUC to more fully vet the IRP compliance concept. And then the primary ask here tonight is to delegate authority to the CEO to provide final approval of the 2022 SVCE IRP, which we'll file on November 1st. And I'll just close by saying that we do certainly intend to provide board members a copy of the final IRP once it's prepared. And I'll pause there for any questions or comments. Thank you.
Well, that was well done and required a lot of attention on the board's part. So thank you for putting the presentation together and the staff report. I'll just offer that what I thought was helpful, and it might help with structuring any questions and discussion is, Maren went, I'm going to call it clockwise, through all the steps that were involved and behind the IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan, and the issues of risk established by potential change for it to become more than a plan, to become obligatory to meet, and the whole discussion of we have all these options, but what's the best to maintain our goal as an organization, but to minimize the risk. And that's where our discussions in September and then tonight have led to the 65% RPS plan. So I think that was particularly helpful, and also explaining how working backwards, I'm going to say, it was right sizing where we can go in terms of our portfolio. And I thought the graphs were very helpful in that way as well. So thank you. And are there any questions that need answering? Now we will come back for discussion. I see, yes, I see no questions, hands raised from the Zoom meeting, but we have questions in the boardroom.
Yes, thank you. That was a great presentation. I'm wondering if we've adequately considered the increase in load due to electric vehicles through the forecasted period. Can you make a comment on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, we were required to use a specific forecast for this IRP. There's an additional sensitivity addressed in the narrative, which does discuss or does look at what we might need under a high electrification scenario. And that does include a higher forecast for electric vehicles. And essentially what we find in that scenario is that even with a 65% RPS target, we would build something that looks more akin to the 75% case. That is a scenario that the CPUC specifically asked for, and I think there is a chance that they may adopt that load forecast as part of either this IRP or in a future cycle. So they are thinking about higher electrification, but it's just not the sort of base input assumptions that they've asked us to use this cycle.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I see Director Martinez Beltran, his hand is raised.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but I lost my question. I needed to close the door, so I'll have to wait till discussion. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Easy to come back. And Director Klein.
Sure. And I understand that we're in kind of a fluctuating time where we don't know if the state's going to enforce IRPs. So kind of looking forward in kind of the changing landscape as far as that's concerned, do you have an idea of when they will formalize that? Would this be something that we're continually like waiting for the state to get back to us on? You know, is it all by July of 2023 they'll make this decision? Do we have any view from a crystal ball standpoint as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So first I'll say that in the narrative, we do speak to the fact that part of the reason, should we decide to adopt this, part of the reason why we are selecting that 65% case is because of the regulatory uncertainty. And so we specifically say, this is something that you need to determine quickly and preferably before the next cycle so that we do have that certainty going into, future iterations of the IRP. It is an active proceeding at the CPUC, so we are working on drafting comments with CalCCA on the issue right now. The first set of comments, I believe, is due mid-December with reply comments due at the beginning of next year. So my hope would be that we would get some sort of direction from the commission, certainly by the end of 2023, which would help us with the 2024 cycle. I think one of the things that caused us concern was that they specifically mentioned in that staff white paper that they might make them enforceable this cycle, which feels a little unfair given that paper came out in the middle of all the LSCs doing their planning.
Okay, and that was my big question. Yeah, it's like, because it's, and I appreciate, Maren, and what staff is doing as far as trying to look forward, but if something happens earlier, how that affects us. So I thank you for taking that into consideration, and we'll see where that comes from a CPUC standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Martinez Beltran, you have your question ready?
Yes, I do. So my question is, if let's say we were to go with the plan for 65%, and then as we reassess and we're moving through the process, we're going to achieve at a higher rate. Is there an incentive to do that once you've established that threshold, or how does that work? Is that just of your own, conviction and mission?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's necessarily an incentive, but in my viewpoint, there's no penalty, right? We aren't going to be held to, oh, you're only allowed to do 65%. Because that's what you said in 2022, right? This is a ongoing planning process, and if we overshoot, no one's gonna be upset with us, I don't think. So I don't see that particularly as a risk, and yeah, I think there's plenty of opportunity going forward, and I think there's going to be lots of healthy debate in this process about how much jurisdiction the CPUC has over the CCAs on requiring us to procure specific resources or specific portfolios. So
I'm just wondering if, how there's kind of breaking it up so that by 2045, we're at a certain point at there's almost like this check-in. If we get closer to the goal and let's say something happens within that second half that puts us back, for example, supply chain that we're having now, issues, would that go towards our goal in 2045 or something like that?
Yeah, that I think is an idea that's been tossed around a little bit, right? Do you get credit for early action? But it's I would say that's even less clear than the overarching enforcement of compliance. So I've heard it mentioned, but certainly, well, I shouldn't say certainly, but to my mind, to my memory, it's not part of the staff proposal that's out there right now.
Okay. I mean, of course, I think we want to do our best, as we always have done as SVCE, but we never would have foreseen some of the things that we've gone through in the past year. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I see no other questions from the board at this time. We will now open the public hearing, and we will go to the public. And I believe we have Twana Carney, I think, who is asking to speak. So please unmute yourself and join our conversation.
No gender identity change here. It's really.
So I assume it is Bruce Carney.
He's hogging his wife's account with Zoom, apparently. Maren, thank you for the excellent analysis. I have a couple of questions. One about Diablo Canyon, one about the possibility of a carbon tax, carbon fee, and dividend. Later tonight, there's going to be a lot of talk about stress tests as it applies to the cost of natural gas and electricity and the price that we can charge. And I'm curious, this may not be a question you can answer, and certainly one that shouldn't interrupt the board's approval of your proposal, but what if there were a $100 per megaton social cost of carbon, and SVCE, because it produces almost no carbon, was able to be a much lower cost electricity provider than our competitors, particularly the DA competitors, who still have a fairly carbon-rich portfolio? How might that affect things? And also, it looked to me like in the declining share of Diablo Canyon, you were assuming that it does phase out in 2024 and 2024 and 2025. What are the odds that it's actually going to extend out another 5 years? And if so, how might that affect the recommendation that you would make? So let me just stop with those two questions, and if there is an opportunity for additional thoughts about them, I'd love to hear them, but if not, consider it homework for another day. Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. And I'm gonna let Monica know that I might turn to her on the carbon tax question if she has any thoughts on that in a moment, but I'll start with Diablo Canyon. So part of the legislation for Diablo Canyon specifically requires or states that the CPUC is not allowed to include it in its ongoing IRP analysis. That being said, I do think that with the 65% RPS portfolio, we would be in a situation where effectively we would still need all those RPS resources, and we would rely on less hydro if we were still able to use our allocation over that longer time horizon. I think there's still a question mark about exactly how the GHG-free attributes from Diablo are going to be allocated going forward. Personally, I think it's pretty likely that the plant's life will be extended through 2030, barring some issue at the federal level. But my expectation is that it will be extended. On the carbon tax question about, what would the world look like if we were getting $100 extra a ton for carbon sort of taxation. I don't have a great answer on exactly what that would look like. I think it's something that they might start thinking about more in the IRP world going forward, adding a social cost of carbon more explicitly to the modeling. But I see Monica's turned on her camera, so I don't know. Okay, just shaking her head, maybe something that we can think about and get back to you on in the future.
Monica, are you coming on?
Oh, no, I just struck I don't have an answer to the carbon
Oh.
tax. It is an interesting question. I think we can think about it and maybe get back at some future date, but I don't have an answer today.
Always good to have food for thought. Thank you. And with that, I will go back to no further comments from the public. We will bring the discussion back to the board for further discussion and or a motion. This is an action item. Yvonne, your hand is up. Director Mekachuk?
I'll make a brief comment and then, or an observation and then a motion. I think my comment is that if there was a carbon tax, that would make it a better thing to meet the requirements from a cost perspective. That's just my sort of reaction to that. But I'd like to put the motion forward to provide the CEO with delegate the approval of the package to him.
Maren, could you put your slide up, which lists the actions that we were being asked to take, to make sure we understand there's multiple actions?
So my motion would be to delegate authority to the CEO to provide final approval of the 2022 IRP to be filed on November the 1st, 2022.
Thank you. Do we have a second? We have Director Willie is providing the second. And if there's no further comment or clarification, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. I will begin with you. Chair Gibbons.
Aye.
Vice Chair Tyson.
Yes.
Director Willie.
Aye.
Makachek.
Aye.
Hilton.
Aye.
Flagger.
Yes.
Rennie.
Aye.
Chua.
Aye.
Martinez Beltran.
Aye.
Abekoga.
Aye.
Walia.
Aye.
Klein.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries unanimously.
And thank you, Maren, and your associates for working with the council or the board back in June and then again in September and then this evening to allow us to understand the material. That was very helpful and appreciated. Thank you. And now we will move on to item number 4. This is authorize the Chief Executive Officer to approve or execute agreements with firms providing services to initiate Silicon Valley Clean Energy to execute its second prepay. This is an action item, and Amrit, CFO and Director of Administrative Services, is going to have fun telling us all about version 2.0.
Thank you, Chair Gibbons. So this is a topic that's very familiar to the board as you know, we executed our first prepay transaction last year, almost a year to this date. The bonds were priced on November 9th, day before my birthday, so I'll remember that. So given the success of the first prepay, we come seeking approval for our second prepay. So we'll go to the next slide, Andrea. So as I said, the purpose is to seek board's approval to execute agreements with firms providing services to enable us to execute our second prepay. I will go through the overview of the request, talk about how we want to leverage the first prepay structure, the physical impact, and the next steps. And I just want to point out that in the appendix, we have a lot of details as well as in the staff report on the timeline of our first prepay, the details of the first prepay and the cost breakdown, and an overview of the prepay structure, how it works, and the background information, which if anyone's interested, I can definitely go through it, but I'm not planning on it. So we'll go to the next slide. So the request we're asking is at this time is to engage with the parties, the firms listed here, PFM Financial Management, LLC, Chapman and Cutler, Ballot Spar, Moody's Investor Service, to give the CEO or authority to execute or approve agreements with these firms so they can provide the services we need to initiate our second prepay. And we're not asking for transactional authority at this point. That could come as early as November. We'll come back to the board and we'll talk about the size of the bonds, the savings thresholds, and we'll present the execution transactional agreements. What we're asking today is to initiate with these firms. Now, the reason I say give CEO the authority to execute or approve is that, as you know, that last year, we established CCCFA, California Community Choice Financing Authority, the conduit that actually issues the bond. So technically, that's a new organization, and we're still establishing process and procedures. And they may be in position to execute this because these firms technically represent their interest as the issuer, as well as our interest. But they have not finalize their process and procedures. So if they're in a position to do so, they may execute, in which case the CEO will approve. Or if they're not in position, like the first prepay transaction and other prepays that have gone before CCCFA, the CEO will of the respective CCA will execute, in our case, Grish. As noted here, we are replicating the first prepay transaction, so the parties are giving us a discount which on an aggregate basis amounts to about 30%. Some points to note here: the fees for nearly all of these counterparties are contingent on the execution of the transaction. So if the transaction doesn't transpire, we are not obligated to pay this fee, with the exception being for Moody's Investor Service. Once we initiate credit rating agency services for the bonds, we are obligated to pay. But to mitigate that risk of stranding that cost, we will initiate the services once we have much more certainty on the likelihood of execution of the transaction. And also, our prepay supplier, Morgan Stanley, has agreed with us that if no fault of either party, either us or Morgan Stanley, the transaction doesn't take place and we did initiate with Moody's, they will split that fee with us. And there's a minor fee that Chapman and Cutler, the Disclosure and Issuers Council, will charge us for an out-of-pocket expense at most of $30,000. So we're asking for approval not for $905,000. As you notice in the staff report, we're asking for $1 million. We're putting about a 10% contingency that may be needed before we execute, and also for some down the road ancillary services we may need from these firms. One footnote here to note is we've used all of these firms before, with the exception of ValidSpar. Last year for Bond and Tax Counsel, the first prepay, we used Oric. We're not in position to use Oric this time because of a potential conflict of interest involving a litigation we're involved in, one of our PPAs. So we've selected ValidSpar, another firm with considerable experience in this area. And they're also a firm that agreed to work with us on the structure of leveraging the first prepay structure, and also gave us a good discount relative to what we were paying Oric last year. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So our prepay supplier, we're also asking approval to engage with Morgan Stanley as a prepay supplier. Now, we upfront are asking Morgan Stanley to lock down the fee that they will charge. These fees are not something we will execute right now. These will be part of the bond purchase agreement that CCCFA, the financing conduit, when at the time we issue the bond, they'll be part of the bond purchase agreement. But the fees we wanted to lock down up front, and they've agreed to charge same fee as they did the first prepay, which is $5 a bond. And just for illustration, I showed that if it's $1 billion in bonds, that would amount to $5 million of underwriting fee. Chances are we will do a prepay in magnitude volume-wise, same as what we did the first prepay, which was around 10-11% of our load, which is about 50 to 55 megawatts. And given the high commodity prices we're seeing right now, that will likely translate to somewhere around $700 to $725 million issuance. Again, the risks to SVCE is very minimal, similar to the first prepay. All costs, underwriting, consultants, attorneys are all paid from the bond proceeds. There's no out-of-pocket cost for us. And the savings threshold that the board will designate, if we are in position to do so in November, we'll bring the transactional documents to the board. That savings threshold will be net of these costs. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So just wanted to emphasize that we want to leverage the effort we put into the first prepay structure. We spent close to over 2 years executing our first prepay, and we want to take advantage of that structure. Since the first prepay we did was, if you remember, we did it in partnership with East Bay Community Energy. Since that first transaction, other CCAs have executed additional prepays or are in the process of executing their first prepays. So since our prepay, MCE executed shortly, a few months later, executed their prepay transaction. EBCE earlier this year executed their second prepay using the same approach that we're proposing today. And there are several other CCAs that are pursuing their prepay transactions right now. Okay, We'll go to the next slide. So the physical impact, the actual savings, if you remember, the savings come from a legal arbitrage between taxable and tax-exempt debt rate. So the savings will actually depend on market conditions and what the spread is between these two tax rates, tax-exempt debt rate. We think we can get savings around 8 to 10%, which could translate to about $3 to $4 million of savings a year. The first prepaid transaction where energy began flowing under that structure beginning of this year, we're realizing savings of about $2 million a year. This is adding up to the savings and significant contribution to our bottom line. It makes us competitive. This is a competitive advantage that we have that IOUs, investor-owned utilities, cannot do. So it gives us a competitive advantage. Again, minimal risk to us. The bonds that are issued are non-recourse to us. If anything happens and the structure fails, we go back to status quo, the way the business was. As you remember, part of this prepaid structure is we will assign or partially assign one of our PPAs, our purchase or a energy transaction into the prepaid structure. If the structure falls apart for anything, that PPA will revert back to us under the original terms. All risk will point towards Morgan Stanley, the prepay supplier. Go to the next slide. So next steps, again, we're in the process of structuring the transaction right now. We could be in position to bring the deal before the board in the November meeting. Once our board approves, we will then have to go to the CCCFA board, likely in December. The regularly scheduled meeting is in December 1st. Once that board approves, we'll be in position to issue the bonds as early as possibly December, but the actual timing will depend on market conditions. We could be in a position that we're ready to execute, but if the market isn't there, we will wait for that opportunity to open up before we execute. Next slide, Andrea. So with that, we seek board approval, but at this point, I'll be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Amrit. Thorough as usual, and appreciate the explanation of the costs, both the cost savings for the consultants and the structure of the Morgan Stanley agreement. With that, are there any questions? Director Willie?
Yeah, thank you, Amrit. Very good presentation. Maybe you could go back to, I think it's either slide 3, maybe, the one where it had the comparison of prepay 1 costs versus prepay 2. Perfect, yeah. And so the question that I've got is, so these represent the fixed costs, and while it's decreasing, which sounds great, whereas I think we're all real accustomed to prices go up, they don't come down. The 30% decrease seems, gosh, pretty surprising. What do we really attribute that on all of these accounts here, it's going down significantly? I could see that we changed from the Oric to Ballard, so maybe we did find a more cost-effective one, but that wasn't the reason behind that. It was a conflict. So can you say something about how all these costs are less now?
Yeah, so the parties, the first transaction, we spent slightly more than 2 years since the time we executed. And a lot of that, there was a significant amount of time, maybe a year or more than a year, that these parties were engaged with us almost on a weekly basis. This time, we're pretty much taking that structure that's already been negotiated. There's not that much tweaking that we're going to do to all the documents. There's tons of documents, as you remember, and that will come before you. So there's not that much that restructuring that we have to do this time. So we're leveraging off of that first structure. So there's less work involved for them. And for that, we said, hey, you need to give us a discount. And they agreed, and they did the same thing for East Bay as well.
Great. So a second question then would be, with this prepay, and we're going to be saving $3 to $4 million a year, sounds great. I would have expected there to be a lot more uncertainty on this second time around, which I would have expected it to cost more, get less benefit out of it. When I look at the economics out there and the way there's so much uncertainty now, and is that not the case as it applies to these prepay vehicles?
Yeah, the prepay economics is largely driven. It is almost exclusively driven by the difference between the tax exempt and the taxable debt rate. So it's really that economics. Generally, what's happening in the market is actually making the conditions favorable, but that doesn't always mean the spread is there. And we really have to look at the market at the given moment in time to see if the opportunity is there to strike and achieve the savings we're targeting. But I would say generally, things like inflation, high tax rates, these are favorable to the economics, prepay.
I'll have to take your word on that, the inflation being something that helps improve the situation, because I would have expected that the uncertainty would have been something to scare people away. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Hey, it sure seems like a good thing to do, and we're in good shape. Thanks.
Director Mekachuk?
I don't have questions, but I will make some comments. And perhaps, Andrea, you could put up the slide from the appendix with the various components of the transaction. It's kind of a busy diagram. If we could just put that up for a sec. What I'd like to do is just say that this is a very complex transaction, and there's a number of moving parts in it that are going on simultaneously. And under each of these transactions, there's a lot of agreements that are very lengthy. And it was a lot of work last year and the lead up to it. And we had multiple meetings on that. And what you're seeing is the benefit of that knowledge, because we don't have to spend an hour going through this diagram, for example. And we spent a lot of time on this because you had to wrap your mind around how this thing actually worked. So that learning curve in understanding is what is resulting in the decrease in fees and the time we're spending on it. And I don't know how many directors are going to change in 2023 at SVCE, but understanding a prepaid transaction should be part of the sort of knowledge base that you have to go through in the training for new board members. And I guess my other comment is that I think the bit of uncertainty that is in a prepay also has to do with what our load is. And what we've got is a very stable and I think growing load. So that's kind of going away as well, and that works to our favor. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Vice Chair Tyson? No, you're all set? Okay. I'm looking to our panelists, board members. I do not see any hands raised. Okay, seeing none, I'll close the question period from the board and go to the public and ask if there are any comments from the public. I see no hands raised. We will turn it back to the board. And I see a comment from Director Chua.
Chair Givens, I just want to make a motion if I could at this time.
I think that'd be fine.
Motion to authorize the CEO to approve or execute agreements with the firms providing services to initiate SVCE to execute its second prepay transaction.
Thank you. And do we have a second? Director Klein?
Second by Klein.
Thank you. Motion made by Director Chua, seconded by Director Klein. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I could please confirm with the maker of the motion and seconder that this also is to approve the engagement with Morgan Stanley as the prepay supplier?
Yes, and
Yes.
also the $1 million, I think, to clarify.
Thank you.
Correct.
Thank you. And the clarification by Director Chua and seconded by Director Klein. Thank you for that question. May we have the roll call?
Yes, Chair Gibbons,
Aye.
Vice Chair Tyson,
Yes.
Willie,
Aye.
Makachuk,
Aye.
Hilton,
Aye.
Liger,
Yes.
Rennie,
Aye.
Chua,
Aye.
Martinez Beltran,
Aye.
Abe Koga,
Aye.
Walia,
Aye.
Klein,
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, and I also would like to thank staff once again because of the innovative and hard work done last year. The advantage that this brings, this competitive advantage that it brings to Silicon Valley clean energy customers is significant, and we were the first, I believe, agency in that first prepay in the country to do it for electricity. So that was 10% of our load, and now we're doing another 10%. So it's a really marvelous accomplishment by the knowledge and insights that our staff, led by our Chief Financial Officer and staff. So thank you very much for making that happen and benefiting our customers.
Thank you.
Next, we will go to item number 5, which is updating Silicon Valley Clean Energy's investment policy and directing PFM Asset Management to implement full scope of work as Silicon Valley Clean Energy's investment advisor. This is an action item, and we will again be joined by Amrit Singh, Chief Financial Officer and Director of Administrative Services.
Thank you, Chair Givens. Speaking of savings, this is another opportunity to bring additional savings to our portfolio to benefit our customers. Go to the next slide, Andrea, please. So the action before the board is to adopt a revised investment policy, and I'll go into the details of that, and to hire PFM Asset Management as our investment advisor. And joining us is Monique Speak, and she's going to join me in making this presentation. And in particular, she's going to take item number 3 in the list below. And we're also asking that the board give us authority to join California Asset Trust Management Trust and the local agency investment fund. And we'll talk about these funds. These are liquid overnight investment funds that can enhance the way we manage our reserves. So in terms of discussions, I will go through and review the objectives and the timeline, the cash flow analysis we did to come up with the initial recommendation. Then I'll turn it over to Monique from PFM Asset Management. And Monique will highlight the changes we made to the investment policy and also talk about the overnight investment option that we're seeking board authority for, and the initial investment recommendation they're making, and also talk about risks and controls and the next steps. And then we'll come back to the board for approval. Okay, so Andrea, next slide, please. So the objective and timeline. The objective is pretty simple. We want to diversify and improve returns. There's a opportunity to earn an additional $4.5 million annually versus what we are doing today. So this is a topic that's important to us now, more so now than in the past, for a number of reasons. One, because our cash position or our reserves are at a sizable level now. growing from close to 60 million in cash position in 2018 to close to 160 million at the end of the 2021 fiscal year. And also there are favorable returns on the market. So, and we have one of the most narrow investment policies of all CCAs, where most of our money, in fact, all our money is in a money market account at a bank, earning a low return of 0.35 or 35 basis point, 0.35%. So to put attention to this area, what we did late last year, we hired actually management partners, a local government agency firm, and they have a lot of municipal finance directors with a lot of experience in this area to help guide us. And with their help, we issued an RFP for investment advisory services, and through that process, we hired PFM Asset Management. And then we spent several months analyzing the cash flows, revising the investment policy. All of this was done under the guidance of the Finance and Administration Committee. We initiated with the committee, with the committee's approval, we initiated discussions with PFM Asset Management. The reason we say full scope of asking authority to initiate full scope of work is that when we initiated work with PFM Asset Management, we executed an agreement with them, which is contingent on the board's approval of the investment policy and explicit direction that we hire PFM Asset Management to be our investment advisor. The work leading up to that was prep work for which PFM Asset Management is not compensated, and their compensation will only be for assets under management based on a fee structure that we talked about in the staff report. We also presented the recommendations we're bringing before you to the Finance and Administration Committee last week, and the committee voted unanimously that the board approve and adopt the proposed action items. And we have the timeline very briefly shown here, but there's more detailed timeline in the appendix as well. And Andrea, we'll go to the next slide. So a little bit on the cash flow analysis, and there's a lot more detail of the cash flow analysis in the staff report, in an attachment to the staff report, and also in the appendix. But basically what we did is, what we want to do is make sure we maintain sufficient liquidity so that we don't have to do an untimely liquidation or partial liquidation of a portfolio to meet our operating needs. So we developed a detailed cash flow model that modeled the inflows, outflows. We looked at our cash needs under normal conditions as well as under stress conditions where revenues can drop significantly. If you remember the stress cases we discussed before with the board, if prices come down, PCIA goes up, PG&E's rates goes down, our revenues goes down. Cost of energy procurement increases significantly due to market price increases, such as what we experienced last month in the extreme heat events, which triggers large collateral calls. So we had a collateral call because of the September heat wave event that within a week we had to post $23 million. So that tells you that we have to have good financial and liquid positions to be able to respond to these type of volatility faced in our business. And the other side of this is if prices also come down, we can have collateral calls from the wholesale transactions we have with our counterparties. So we went through this analysis, and what we determined is that we can hold 25 million cash to meet our normal business operations. And we want to hold 30 million in a highly liquid overnight fund to respond to the volatility, such as the CAISO heat event that we experienced. And as of the timing of this report, the cash position was at 165 million. This is cash position, not our financial position, because at this time, substantial amount of cash was posted as collateral to the CAISO too. So we determined that we could easily invest 110 million with a maturity date of 0 to 3 years. In other words, the fixed income securities that Monique will go through gives back our principal in a 3-year time frame. We didn't want to go for a longer duration, a longer maturity period, because one, we're holding reserves for specific reasons, which is to meet the risks such as those we model in our stress test. So should those conditions happen, that's why we hold reserves. And also we want to be in a position that we can, in a reasonable time frame where we can have better view and ability to manage our cash operations. And again, we can fine tune this once we further fine tune our cash flow model and as we gain operating experience with this new cash management approach. So with the next, so there's a lot of details again on the analysis, but I'll wait for questions on that. And the next slide, I believe I turn it over. I turn it over to Monique, and she will go through in detail as to what their initial recommendations are, as well as changes to our investment policy, which, by the way, is the governance mechanism through which the board will oversee PFM asset management's activity, where they will act in a fiduciary manner as our investment advisor.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be at this board meeting. And as CFO Singh mentioned, I will go through a couple of things in my presentation. First and foremost would be to review our recommendations for Silicon Valley Clean Energy's investment policy, with the goal being to have you approve those investment policy changes. We will also review our recommendations for the portfolio maturity structure and the benchmark, essentially our recommendations in lieu of the cash flow analysis that was performed by ourselves and SVCE staff. And we will also review the proposed portfolio structure that we have for those 2 buckets of cash, that $30 million in the quasi-overnight liquidity investments and the longer-term portfolio that can go out to 3 years. So I want to start with the investment policy recommendations. As CFO Singh mentioned, we spent a lot of time reviewing the current investment policy and providing recommendations. Our recommendations are meant to help incorporate best practices into your investment policies, such as those written and established by the California Municipal Treasurers Association and the Association of Public Treasurers for the United States and Canada. We also wanted to expand the list of authorized investments in the policy to allow for most of the investment types permitted by the California Government Code. As CFO Singh mentioned, the current investment policy for SVCE currently only allows for deposits at the bank and other overnight investments. The black line version of the policy shows all our recommended edits, and I believe is included in your packet. Now, I want to take a step back to give you some context for our investment policy changes. And what you're looking at here is a graphic of the investment universe as it compares to what the California Government Code allows for agencies like SVCE to invest in. The investment universe is divided into 4 main categories. Starting from the bottom of this graphic, we have alternatives, and that includes things like commodities, real estate, hedge funds, private equity, venture capital, intangible assets, and complex derivatives. All of those investment types are prohibited. Equities as a category is prohibited for public agencies like SVCE. You're not allowed to invest in any domestic equity, international equity, or emerging markets. And then broader fixed income. This includes high yield bonds, emerging debt, convertible equity to fixed income debt, etc. All of these investment types are prohibited by the California Government Code. Now, what agencies like SVCE can invest in, what is permitted by the California Government Code, is this category of conventional fixed income. And not only conventional fixed income, which I would also call high quality fixed income, but short duration, short maturity fixed income securities. As you can see on this chart, the outer maturity limit for these asset types for California entities is essentially 5 years. unless you receive special permission from the board. So what we're looking at is high quality, short duration fixed income securities, such as United States Treasury obligations, federal agency bonds, municipal securities, corporate notes, negotiable certificates of deposit, asset-backed securities, etc. Now, our recommendation for SVCE's policy was to expand its investment types to include investments generally in 3 categories. We wanted to expand the options for overnight securities. So currently, money market funds are not permitted by the policy and other local government investment pools. The California Asset Management Trust, which is an investment pool that we recommend for SVCE, is currently a local government investment pool that is a California public agency that offers a cash reserve portfolio, essentially an investment pool that provides good options and good diversification for liquidity. In the government category, we are recommending that SVCE expand its policy to allow for U.S. Treasury obligations, federal agency obligations, municipal bonds, and supranational obligations. Supranational, in case you're not familiar with that term, is an all-encompassing term meant to encompass agencies such as the World Bank, International Bank of Reconstruction and Development, essentially those sort of quasi-government corporations that are considered government categories. Now, we do note that for any investment outside of treasuries and agencies, we are adding a 5% per issuer limitation that we recommend. And this allows and requires us to appropriately diversify your investment holdings so that you are not overly invested in any one issuer. So not only are we looking at diversification by sector, but plenty of diversification within the sector. Moving on to the credit category, we're recommending that SVCE allow for commercial paper, negotiable certificates of deposit, asset-backed securities, which would be obligations, for example, that may be backed by certain receivables, such as equipment leases, auto leases, credit card receivables, etc. We continue to recommend 5% per issuer in the credit category, and we also have medium-term notes, which are traditional corporate notes. Moving forward outside of what we've recommended for the policy, we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the obligations that we are recommending for implementation. So if you approve these policy changes, these are the types of obligations that we are recommending. I talked a little bit about the California Asset Management Program, which has a cash reserve portfolio. These statistics are as of September 23rd, but essentially what we're looking at is this cash reserve portfolio, which has a weighted average maturity of 26 days for the underlying investments. It is essentially an investment pool that acts as a money market fund-like product. It is AAA rated by Standard & Poor's, offers same-day liquidity. This is a product that SVCE staff would be able to wire funds in and out of directly. PFM Asset Management, for example, has no ability and will have no ability to move cash assets. It allows for multiple sub-accounts, no minimum investment, and gives SVCE the ability to essentially have that quasi-liquidity at a very competitive yield. I note since we've printed this, CAMP's current 7-day yield has risen already to a 3.12%. That just gives you a sense of the liquidity and the sort of value in that product. The longer duration portfolio for the assets that were targeted for that 0 to 3 year maturity range, we took a number of different approach to analyzing the options there. With staff and with the committee, we looked at evaluating different market benchmarks. We analyzed the risk and return characteristics of those different benchmarks, which serve as a proxy for the maturity structure and risk profile of the strategy we would ultimately be recommending. We brought in specialists at PFM Asset Management to perform analysis on gas prices to help us really identify at what price volatility index the portfolio would be expected to perform if we had a stress case scenario that SVCE was contemplating. And with all that, we ultimately recommended that SVCE utilize the 1 to 3 year US Treasury index to compare the performance of the long-term portfolio that we were planning to invest up to 3 years. And that recommendation is consistent with the cash flow analysis performed by staff, ourselves, and with the risk and return objectives that we identified through those numerous conversations with SVCE staff and the committee. Now, with all that information, this is what the portfolio would ultimately look like. We had constructed this portfolio based on the policy recommendations we created. Just to give you a sense of some of the statistics on this page, we were looking at 110 million, a duration of 1.7 years. That gives you a sense of its average maturity. Net of PFM Asset Management's annual fee, which is approximately 7.8 basis points based on the asset size, you're looking at a net yield of 4.33%. The sector allocation is shown in the top right, and you can see here that there's still a very healthy allocation to government securities. The majority of the portfolio is in government securities in actuality, and we have about 40% of the portfolio in corporate notes, between corporate notes and asset-backed securities. Again, our structured portfolio assumes that we'd be diversified in all these sectors with no more than 5% per issuer across the board. So we anticipate a very highly diversified, appropriately structured portfolio. Now, I do want to take a moment to talk about our credit risk management procedures. At PFM Asset Management, we have a credit research group, and because we are focused primarily on public agencies and mission-driven organizations, we have a very conservative credit philosophy. We only invest in high quality issuers. We tend to prefer US domiciled corporations. We have a credit research group that has two primary components, both the taxable credit committee that looks at traditional taxable debt, and a public finance committee, which looks at municipal obligations. Now, the municipal obligations that we look at, we are only purchasing taxable munis, but we believe it's a very different type of credit analysis for municipal obligations, so we have specialists. The credit research group does all of the fundamental research on the approved issuers. And then on the right side, we have a risk assessment committee. And what the risk assessment committee does is it oversees our policies associated with those issuers. So for example, there may be an issuer that's approved, but may only be approved for very short duration. Exposure, for example. And the risk management committee sets all those guidelines in terms of issuer diversification and maturity limitations. We also wanted to take a moment to speak about our cybersecurity infrastructure. We know that cybersecurity has continued to grow as a risk, particularly for public agencies, and we want to assure you that we have a very strong cybersecurity infrastructure. PFM Asset Management is actually owned by US Bank Asset Management, which allows us to lean on all the cybersecurity infrastructure that is maintained by the bank, which we're really excited about. Our systems are proactively monitored 24/7. All of our websites have industry standard threat management gateways. We require an authorized user account consisting of ID and passwords, and that meets industry best practices for security. I will also note that sensitive information related to SVCE is only available to specific PFM Asset Management employees who have responsibility for that data. So for example, me being your liaison will not have, for example, the access or your account information. That's limited to sort of our folks who will interface with your custodian. We also have a dual review and authorization process for any client request for changes to sensitive information such as wire ACH instructions. I'm sure you've heard of recent phishing schemes where folks will seek to change ACH instructions or wire instructions. So we have specific procedures to guard against that. I also want to make note as I'm wrapping up here that we do have a comprehensive reporting and education program. We plan to meet with SVCE staff quarterly to review the portfolio activity, confirm the strategy that we're implementing, speak about any liquidity requirements associated with the funds, and discuss general investment information. Our goal is to serve as an extension of your staff and be sort of your subject matter experts on the ground with regard to the investment of your assets. We provide comprehensive reporting that is GASB compliant. We will have monthly statements, online access to daily transactional information. We will be providing performance reporting, and we've included samples of performance reports and monthly statements in the appendix. And then we also offer a number of educational and training opportunities. You know, as SVCE staff grows over the years, we're happy to have you all lean on our commentaries, white papers, webinars, and seminars to help continue to educate and grow your staff expertise. Now, in terms of next steps, a couple of things. PFM Asset Management, as SVCE's investment advisor, we will never take control of SVCE's cash or investments. It is best practice, and we strongly recommend that SVCE contract with a third-party custodial bank to provide custody services for SVCE's assets. So we'll be working with SVCE to contract that custodian. We will be working on assisting SVCE in establishing its camp accounts and other accounts, and we'll be working to input your compliance, your policy rules into our compliance system and connect with the ultimate successful custodial contact. Ultimately, SVCE will transfer those funds to the custodial bank where we can begin to make purchases. In the interim, it's anticipated that funds will likely sit in camp or the investment pool while we're getting the custodial bank arranged. On an ongoing basis, we plan to invest the funds with the agreed upon investment strategy. As I stated before, we will be in close contact with SVCE staff, keeping them updated every step of the way. Ideally, we will have the portfolio fully invested over the remainder of 2022, so we can come back with a fully formed investment update with 12/31 data. We will continue to provide comprehensive reporting. As I mentioned, those reports are included in the appendix. And of course, we're always available to meet with the Finance and Administration Committee or the board as requested. And that concludes my slides. So I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Monique. That's a lot for the board to understand, and I thank you for presenting it in a clear fashion. The Finance and Administration Committee has reviewed this material and worked with staff along the way to identify different approaches, and what you see here is the result of those efforts. So I will now ask if there are any questions for either Amrit or perhaps Monique. And I am looking, Vice Chair Tyson.
Thank you, Chair. Monique, very nice presentation, very clear. And one question, you did speak briefly about municipal bonds, and my understanding is municipal bonds have an advantage in a lower rate, but they're tax-free to the purchaser. And as a non-tax paying entity, why would we have that as part of our portfolio here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So municipal bonds are, tax advantage for the most part. Many municipal bonds are issued as tax exempt financing, but there is a sleeve in the municipal bond market where municipalities are issuing taxable bonds. And for our public agency clients, we only purchase taxable municipal bonds because there's no value in the tax exempt market for us.
Very clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I will see no questions from those on the dais. So are there any questions from the board on Zoom? I see no hands raised. And we will close the board question and move to the public opportunity to ask questions. I see no hands raised there. We will then close the public comment portion of the discussion and move it back to the full board for discussion and/or a motion. I wanted to ask a couple of quick things. The work that's been done here to date has not had a cost to Silicon Valley Clean Energy, as I understand it. This is all the work that's been evaluated and time spent to prepare a proposal of policy changes and contracts. And Amrit is saying yes. Two is that all the contracts that are being incorporated here have been reviewed by our legal counsel, and that our audit reviewers or other financial consultants have reviewed these as well. And Amrit, you're saying yes again?
Yes, the contract has been reviewed by legal. That's when it was executed, and the results will be audited as part of our ongoing audit once this is in play.
So it'll be incorporated into our regular auditing procedures. Yes. Great, thank you very much. If there is no further discussion, the chair would consider a motion. Do we have anyone with their hands raised to make a motion? The
So
vice
moved.
chair, oops, who was that?
It's Nisa, Chair Gibbons. So moved. I'm not on camera.
Oh, all right, Nisa, Director Flygore, thank you.
Tyson will second.
And Tyson will second. Given no further comments, questions on the motion, may we have a roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair. And if I could just clarify that that is to adopt Resolution 202224, 202225, and 202226. Chair Gibbons.
Aye.
Vice Chair Tyson.
Yes.
Director Willie.
Aye.
Director Makachuk.
Aye.
Director Hilton.
Aye.
Flygor.
Yes.
Rennie.
Aye.
Chua.
Aye.
Martinez Beltran.
Aye.
Abekoga.
Aye.
Walia.
Aye.
Klein.
Aye.
Lee.
Yes.
Thank you, and that motion carries unanimously.
Thank you all, and delighted to have you join us as our financial advisor, PFM Associates Assets Management. And it's an appropriate thing for us to do, given our well-founded risk management analysis and preparation for having reserves appropriate to our business climate and needs. So thank you for staff and Monique for all the work that took us to this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your meeting. Thanks.
Okay. And we will now move to item number 6. I would take note that we'll finish item number 6 and we'll go to board member announcements, and then we will have a closed door session beginning with public comment on the closed door session, which I will read into the notes, meeting notes. So item number 6, this is a new construction reach code update, a presentation, and staff is Tony Yulo, Senior Public Sector Services Manager.
Chair Gibbons, members of the board, it's my privilege to be here tonight filling in for Zoe. Next slide, please. We're going to just go over some quick reach code impacts. Most of you are familiar with them. I'll provide a quick status update and highlight some upcoming actions. Next slide, please. There's a lot of different ways to think about reach codes, and this slide really does a nice look at just looking at the advantages associated with a reach code for gas water heating. So under the base code, in the next 3 years, we'd assume there'd be about 25,000 homes built with gas water heating. With an all-electric reach codes, that would be 25,000 homes with a heat pump water heater. Going down a row, there would be $12 million of replacement costs of switching those water heaters from gas to electric ultimately, whereas if they start as electric, there's zero replacement cost. Those gas water heaters cost what they do when they're built. And as we know, all electric construction is less expensive. So we would see about a $40 million savings in those homes at the time of construction. We would be looking at a savings of 25,000 metric tons of carbon just from the water heaters alone annually, if they're all electric. And then if you look at the EV element to it, really ensuring that those residents that are moving into multifamily housing have charging. It's just essential as we move forward in a society with electric vehicles. Next slide, please. So as you can see, and we have a slightly larger version of the dates on the following slide, but really in the last month, we've seen some new activities, people moving forward in Gilroy, Campbell, Los Altos Hills, Los Altos, Los Gatos, Monte Sereno, and Saratoga. All of those agencies have had information sessions this year. All jurisdictions are moving toward their first vote on a REACH code. And then not locally, but statewide, something that really enters into this is that the California Air Resources Board has passed a rule that's going to end the sale of gas heaters and water heaters by 2030. And how that plays into REACH codes is if a building is being built today with gas, it is being kind of built in a way that's not compatible with the future that we know is just 8 years away. So when those gas water heaters in a new building go out, they won't be able to be replaced in kind. They will have to be replaced with electric replacements, which is much more complex and expensive. And you can see that we've met with all of the board members. All of your agencies have returned the letter of intent and letter of interest to get the grant. And we've provided additional outreach and technical consultation with consultants for many of you. Next slide, please. Here's the kind of upcoming dates for first readings. After this was published, at least one of these dates changed. I know Morgan Hill has slid back 2 weeks, but you can see that all the agencies have a first reading scheduled in the coming months. So we're seeing movement on every front, basically. We're seeing things advance. It's a very exciting time. It keeps us busy. We are making an effort to reach out to you, to our board members and alternate board members in the week before votes, just once the staff report is available. Benna from our staff will reach out and see if there's any need for us to set up a quick session to go over any questions that you may have. So you can look forward to those messages from Benna where we sit down and say, what do you need to know? And we provide you with anything that you're looking for. Next slide, please. Basically, everyone is online. Everyone is moving forward. As I said, it's an exciting time. And this is not an action item. There's no need for a motion, but I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Tony. Great work by Zoe and yourself and others. So thank you for that information. And each city has had some great discussions. Are there any comments or questions that we'd like to ask? I see none from the dais, and I see, oops, there's a raised hand. Director Walia.
Thank you, Chair Gibbons. Just a quick word of thanks to the full Clean Energy SVCE team for being very responsive, constantly keeping in touch with staff and myself, and just being here available all the time for any questions. Big thank you. Much appreciated. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Director Flygore.
Thank you, Chair. And if we're doing thanks, I also want to echo my thanks. Staff has just been remarkable assisting our city, Los Altos, and staff as we go through the REACH Codes 2.0 process. I know for a fact we could not have done what we've done to date without SVCE's help. So big thank you. And I wanted to make sure Girish, the CEO, heard how much we appreciated his staff helping our city. I do have good news, and I'll announce it later. So thank you.
All right, now we're having with bated breath.
Yes.
Director Nekacek.
Thank you. I did want to say that when Monty Serena went through the REACH codes several years ago, it was a 3-2 vote in favor of the REACH codes, and I think one of our council members changed it during the meeting. So that was a huge accomplishment, and John Supp, if you remember back then, I think he was wearing a Kevlar vest at our council meeting. In any event, we passed the REACH codes with a 5-5 vote, 5-4-0 against, so that was a big accomplishment. And it's interesting that we were able to move people to putting in 1 car charger per garage parking spot to a maximum of 2. So if they have a 3-car garage, they have to have 2 charging outlets in the garage and 1 external. So we're very pleased that went through. And the interesting part that I found interesting is that although we essentially outlawed gas inside the house, we allowed it for cooking purposes. And I think that people are really going to think about that. You know, do they need gas for cooking? But if you step back and you really think about it, we need to address the cooking part. So we're hoping to come up with something on that to start to show people the ease, the value, and how cooking with induction cooktops is better. So those are just some of my thoughts for the other board members and their councils. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no other hands raised. We will go to the public to see if there's any comments from the public. I see no hands raised from the public. So we will bring it back. I will just say for the rest of us that it's been great going through this REACH Codes 2.0. We still have a ways to go to actually finalize, but it's been great, and many expressions of appreciation for staff to work thoughtfully and carefully with staff and council members to educate everyone on what this means for our communities and the future. So with that, we will close that discussion item, and we will move to board member announcements and direction on future agenda items. And I'm going to call on Director Flygore to tell her good news.
I think I raised expectations too high, but we do have good news in Los Altos. We just recently announced the new hire of a sustainability coordinator. We had our first sustainability coordinator hired, I think in 2019, Emiko, and she was amazing. And she helped shepherd through REACH Codes 1.0. And so it was a big loss for the city and obviously for environmental efforts when she left the city earlier this year. And that's why I had big thanks to SVCE, because they were able to step in and really help staff when Emiko left. But we have a new sustainability coordinator. We're doing the onboarding process right now. And so hopefully she can step in with REACH Codes 2.0 and at least continue to lead the process. So thanks.
Well done. I'm going to go to Director Lee and then Director Klein.
Thank you. I just want to announce thanks. We just had a Day on the Bay this past Saturday, an annual event over in Viso to highlight all the great services the county is doing, and also the great community of Viso of the Bay. Our folks are doing kayaking, free pumpkins, giveaways, but also a lot of the great things that our community is doing together. And I want to specifically thank Girish and the SVCE team for sponsoring the solo stage at the Day in the Bay. because that way we were able to reduce our carbon footprint by the help of charging our stage operations to a fully solar setup, which helped us remove the diesel generators that we've been using before and completely power the stage with solar power. So I just want to say huge thanks to SVC for the great support. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Exciting times. Wow. And then Director Klein.
Sure. So it's a great announcement. About 2 weeks ago, so Sunnyvale received the Silicon Valley Business Journal's 2022 Best Public Civic Project for our new City Hall. So our City Hall isn't open, but of course, thanks to SVCE grant funding, it will be the first net zero LEED Platinum City Hall in the US. And so even though we're not open, even though staff hasn't moved in, we're already receiving awards for that. And, I think it's really, it shows our city's commitment to sustainability, but thanks to SVCE for helping to make that possible.
Well, congratulations for having the political and community support to make that happen. And so glad that Silicon Valley Clean Energy could be there to kind of give it a boost. So well done. Congratulations. And I'll just mention that I attended the I just wanted to mention that I wanted to put out there that I attended the Haas Energy Institute's webinar last week on paying for electricity in California, how residential rate design impacts equity and electrification. Like all of their presentations, it's basically eye-opening, mind-opening. And if you get invited to attend any of their webinars, you can also look at past webinars. They are recorded, and you can look them up. This one I would recommend looking up because it ties into a lot of our discussions about equity and the future costs of electricity. And it ties into PUC regulations and a lot of other things. So it's interesting to have some advanced knowledge of some of the pretty outside the box ideas that are discussed. So if you have a chance, I would encourage you to watch this one and or any of the others. You should get on the mailing list there. They have informative, if not challenging, presentations. So I would encourage that. And I see no other hands raised. So we will now prepare to go to the closed session. This is going to be a conference on legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation pursuant to paragraph 4 of subdivision D of the section 54956.9, one potential case. Do we have any comments from the public? I see none. And with that, we will move to closed session. You board members have a special Zoom meeting. You'll need to close out of this Zoom meeting, go into the new Zoom meeting, but please, after this closed door session, come back to the original meeting so that we can report out any action, if any, taken. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for allowing us that closed door session. And if the clerk would let us know when we have a quorum.
We have a quorum, Chair.
Thank you. And with that, there is no reportable action from our closed door session. And we will adjourn this meeting to our next regularly scheduled meeting in November. Is it November 12th? What is it? November?
That would be November 9th.
November 9th. Thank you all. Good night.